So, as a kind of lead-in to our main topic this week, I wanted to share with you guys this L'Oreal ad brand video. So I stumbled across this and just like looking up a couple of different things, and this is from 2021, and the tone of it is particularly interesting given what we're going to get into in the rest of the episode, but also take note of in the beginning like how they kind of like historicize L'Oreal, and then also what the sort of main messaging here is, and we can kind of just talk through it.
Let's do it.
Beauty is power. And much like power, often it must be taken. Taking your beauty into your own hands is empowering. Believing in your own beauty is something no one else can control.
This is like a star-studded affair.
Celine Dion.
Yeah.
L'Oreal Paris has always been on the side of women.
That lady just like
in
stopped traffic.
1909, when cutting your hair short was a social statement. In the 50s, when wearing trousers to work was an act of defiance. Even as recent as the 1970s, seeing women in roles outside the home being powerful or confident.
I feel like they missed a few decades.
L'Oreal stood with them for who they were.
No, Susan Sarandon,
and who
no.
They wanted
Yes.
to be. We have always believed in women's worth. We are not a beauty brand. We are a brand that gives power to women.
Got it.
Okay, well,
No
one
matter the
woman,
age
one particular woman.
or the color of their skin.
Okay, I think you get the idea
All right,
of this, but I just like something about the whole tone of the ad of like beauty is power, and like power it has to be taken, and with like the rhythmic orchestral things, it gives off a very particular vibe, let's just say.
A vibe that's purposely ignored in the ad. They do a little fast forward from 1908 right to the 1950s.
Look, you know, not everybody understood what girl power was at the time, and there's maybe some historical figures that just, you know, didn't jive with that particular ad campaign. It was sticking to the brand, which is gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss.
That's right.
But said in a thick German accent.
Yeah, we must gaslight, gatekeep, and girl boss.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I have those big dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off his death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
We meet again.
You've got Chris.
Hello, I was muted, sorry.
Christopher! And we've got Carrie.
Bonjour.
So today, as you could probably tell by our intro, we're going to be talking about L'Oreal. And we initially had sort of the idea for this episode, we were going to talk about Francois Bettencourt Myers, who's sort of like the heiress to, the L'Oreal money. She's worth $88.2 billion currently. I believe she's the richest woman in the world.
Yep.
And so, we were kind of throwing around ideas for that, and we ended up deciding, we really want to talk about like L'Oreal as the entire company to sort of set the stage. And so what we're going to do is walk through the history of the company, starting with its founding, talk about some of the members of this family that have owned it and been interconnected to the money therein, some of the scandals it's been involved with, and some of the really awful labor practices that it's engaged with. So to start us off, I wanted to talk about the early history of L'Oreal, and particularly some stuff about its founder, which again, as you probably heard in that little commercial, it jumps from 1909 to the 1950s. And there's a very specific reason for that you can probably already guess at. But to start at the beginning, L'Oreal was founded by a French chemist and pharmacist named Eugene Paul Louis Schuler. Schuler was born in 1881 in Paris to Charles and Amélie Schuler, who owned a pastry shop. And like all good middle-class children of his time, he went through schooling, and then as a young man, he attended the Institute of Applied Chemistry of Paris, which he graduated from top of his class at age 23. He initially took a job as a lab assistant and sort of a career path to becoming a university chemical researcher. But this is where then like the founding entrepreneurial myth kicks in. And I'll read here from this piece that I'm going to be quoting from a couple of times in my little segment. But this is a piece from Smithsonian Magazine by Tom Sankton from September 7th, 2017. Quote, "The owner of a large barbershop paid Schuler a visit, looking for help in creating a synthetic hair dye. Back in the early 20th century, French women were not regularly dyeing their hair, mostly because the toxic dye of the time had heavy lead content that irritated the scalp. Schuler was intrigued and agreed to be technical advisor to the barber until he cut ties and struck out on his own, experimenting with hair dyes in a rented lab in Paris. He had a period of trial and error with the dye, but by 1909, he had a successful formula and founded this, and I'm going to mangle all the French stuff in this, by the way.
Yeah, me too, intentionally, actually.
So he founded the Société Française des Teintures Inoffensives pour Cheveux, which translates to the French Company of Inoffensive Hair Dyes. He soon changed the name of his fledgling company to L'Oreal, another word for Aureole, a popular hairstyle of the era, as well as a play on the word aureole or halo. So to pop out of the article, I was trying to look around, and what actually was in his formula of dyes seems to be something of a continued trade secret, so I can't speak to why his worked, but it did, and the dyes were a big hit in France, and then pretty soon abroad. He expanded the company into Italy in 1910, Austria in 1911, and the Netherlands in 1913. When the First World War broke out, he enlisted in the French army, and he fought on the front in a place called Chemin des Dames, which translates to the Ladies' Path. He survived and was decorated for his service, and then he returned back to his company after the war. And the L'Oreal website mentions that he was so dedicated to his business that he mortgaged his house to continue expansion. In the boom of the 1920s, demand for hair dyes and other beauty products rose dramatically and made the company very successful and made him very rich. And to sum up the rest of his life, here is the official L'Oreal biography from their website, covering the 1930s to his death in 1957, and see again if you can catch the leap in the timeline made here. So this is reading from the L'Oreal biography. Quote, "Schuler excelled in advertising. From the outset, he surrounded himself with the best poster designers of the 1930s. He created a radio jingle and in 1933 released Votre Beauty magazine, which built a readership of over 1 million women. His creativity and entrepreneurial spirit also secured him an advertising Oscar in 1953, by which time L'Oreal was setting the standard in the beauty industry and had secured a loyal following among its target audiences." So it jumped from 1933 to 1953.
Just a little gap there. Don't worry about it.
I don't know.
Don't worry about it.
In his later years, Schuler laid the foundations for L'Oreal's future. And then skipping to the end, he was a man of action and a creative spirit. He was the first to build a beauty industry on a bedrock of science. For half a century, he laid the groundwork for a company that would offer unparalleled quality and safety innovations to meet the full range of beauty needs and trends. That credo holds true today. L'Oreal has gone from strength for more than 110 years and continues to cement its position as the global leader in the beauty industry. Eugene Schuler seized the moment. He creates the beauty that moves the world. #beauty that moves.
See what you can do when you believe science?
One of the reasons I wanted to read this is also the emphasis that he was like a man of action and seized the moment. This language that was also kind of echoed in the advert. And so, the missing bit of history is a crucial one of European and world history, and that's namely the rise of fascism in the interwar period, leading through to the Second World War and the Holocaust and its aftermath. Now, dear listener, you can guess why this piece is left out, and you may have noticed that I didn't mention the title of that Smithsonian Magazine piece by Tom Sankton. And the full title of that is, quote, "The Titan Who Founded L'Oreal Prospered Under the Nazis. How the head of the world's top cosmetic firm fell in with the Nazi sympathizers of German-occupied France and emerged from the war as successful as ever."
Sure, he prospered under them, but it's not like he collaborated with, anybody.
It's not like he was a Nazi.
Yeah, it's not like he openly collaborated with pro-Nazi elements in France during the occupation or anything like that.
Or even prior to the occupation. The big piece here is that in addition to being a successful businessman, Schuller was also an extreme far-right ideologue. He hated the French Republic, he hated democracy, he hated Jews and other minorities, and above all, he hated socialism. And like a true ideologue, he combined all of these things in his mind. And so as among his pet peeves were the 5-day work week and the mandatory 2-week vacation time.
Oh, shit.
Which, as the Smithsonian piece points out, actually helped Schuller's bottom line because more free time and vacationing led to an increase of his products. But nevertheless, he was committed to his anti-socialism. And in the mid-1930s, he discovered an organization that helped espouse and act on these beliefs. In 1936, another far-right Frenchman, Eugene Deloncle, and this is a name that's going to come up a lot, so I just want to talk about the pronunciation of this a bit. I'm not sure if it's Deloncle or Deloncle. It's Deloncle, but I'm going to say Deloncle because that's the funniest one to me.
All right, I like it.
So Eugene Deloncle had founded in 1936 this fascist terrorist group named the Secret Committee of Revolutionary Action, or more commonly known as La Cagoule, meaning the cowl or the hood. And they in part got that nickname from other far-right groups who thought that their actions were reminiscent of the Ku Klux Klan.
Jesus Christ.
So La Cagoule engaged in a series of assassinations, bombings, and other terror plots throughout the 30s in attempts to overthrow the government. Deloncle courted Schuller to join and help La Cagoule financially, which Schuller enthusiastically agreed to, going so far as to lend L'Oreal's offices to hold La Cagoule's meetings.
Jeez.
Eventually, the organization was infiltrated by the French police, and about 70 members, not including Schuller, were arrested for another series of assassination plots that they had coming up. But they were all eventually let go at the beginning of the Second World War to be allowed to join the French army. And some left the org at this point, but others stayed in, and the org eventually became one of several far-right French fascist groups who willingly collaborated with the Nazis after the fall of France in 1940. Now, remember, Schuller had dodged getting arrested back in 1937, and he had maintained that although he had financially and ideologically supported La Cagoule, he had nothing to do with their acts of violence. Like, look, I just let them plan this stuff in my company office. I don't listen to what they're saying. So how did he fare under the Nazi occupation itself? The Smithsonian piece lays it out pretty comprehensively, so I'll just read a big chunk of it here. Quote, "Under the occupation, Schuller's writings and lectures became more explicitly pro-Nazi and anti-Republican. In his 1941 book, La Révolution de l'Économie, for example, he wrote, quote, I know full well that we don't have the chance that the Nazis did coming to power in 1933. We don't have the gift that the Germans had. We don't have the faith of National Socialism. We don't have the dynamism of a Hitler pushing the world, end quote. Elsewhere in this volume, which was a part of a collection that also published a compendium of Hitler's speeches, Schuller wrote, quote, we must rip from men's hearts the childish concepts of liberty, equality, and even fraternity, which can only lead to disaster.
God damn, dude.
Following the German victory, Deloncle's Cagoule operated openly with the blessing of the Nazi occupiers and collaborationist Vichy government. And in June 1941, at the group's convention, Schuller made this startling statement. Quote, None of these peaceful revolutions can happen without, first of all, a preliminary revolution of both purification and revival, and that one can only be bloody. It will consist quite simply of quickly shooting 50 or 100 important personages. He promoted similar ideas along with his economic theories in broadcasts over the German-controlled French radio. Schuler was also connected with notorious German official Helmut Knaken, the commander of police and security for the SS intelligence service. Actively involved in the deportation of French Jews to the Nazi death camps, Knaken was also responsible for the execution of several thousand French resistance members and civilian hostages.
Jesus Christ.
Interrogated by French intelligence services after the war, he listed Schuler among his voluntary collaborators. In 1947, French investigators discovered a list of 45, quote, agents of Knaken, among them E. Schuler, businessman. He was seeking to get himself named Minister of the National Economy in the Vichy government, Knaken told interrogators. Schuler never won that coveted post, but he was designated as the future Minister of National and Imperial Production on a list that Knaken drew up in 1941. Perhaps most importantly, Schuler was also instrumental in forging a partnership between Valentine, a large paint and varnish manufacturer that Schuler was co-director of, and the German firm Druckfarben. Archival documents, including an internal journal for 1941 to 1944, indicate that as much as 95% of the company's wartime tonnage was delivered to the German Navy. According to the Reich's paint plan, Valentine was listed since 1941 in the first category of paint suppliers. Gerhard Schmelinski, a German businessman who helped to establish the partnership, was a key figure in the Nazis' Aryanization program to strip Jewish owners of their businesses and other property. Schmelinski worked closely with Schuler, whom he praised as, quote, an ardent partisan of the Franco-German Accord. Thanks largely to his relations with the Germans, says French historian Annie Lacroix-Riz, Schuler augmented his fortune considerably during the war. His tax returns for the period show that his personal net income increased nearly tenfold between 1940 and 1943. Between 1940 and 1944, L'Oreal sales nearly quadrupled. Hashtag beauty that moves. So, popping out of that piece, that's not a bad payday. The number estimated is about 2.5 million francs. It was what he ended up with it as his personal fortune in 1943. But of course, the good times always come to an end, and the Nazi fever dream was on the wane by 1944. And after the liberation of France, the national mood was not particularly keen on them that had collaborated with the occupation, and Schuler was denounced by a former employee in the post-war score settling. However, investigations turn up not very much in terms of concrete evidence, and Schuler got off the hook. Worth mentioning here is that this Smithsonian piece notes this bit of evidence, the lack of substantial financial ties between L'Oreal and the Nazis during the war, this doesn't hold up to scrutiny. It seems highly unlikely, given the success of the company and Schuler himself, that at the time that there wasn't more active collaboration, especially considering that all of his products, that, you know, all the stuff that L'Oreal produced required a variety of like imports and special chemicals, right? Things that would have been hard to have come by during the war, things that you would have had to have permits for and stuff. So again, this claim that like, hey, my company wasn't really doing that much Nazi stuff, kind of shaky. But also part of Schuler's defense was that, you know, of course, he hadn't really been a Nazi at all. He claimed that Delangle had basically tricked him into joining La Cagoule with spooky propaganda. Now, Delangle, by the way, was not so lucky. During the war, he had gotten involved with the Abwehr, which was like the German military intelligence. Hitler was always very suspicious about the Abwehr plotting against himself, and for that involvement that he had, Delangle was shot by the Gestapo in 1944. Rest in piss. But the fact that he had died during the war as well made it a little bit easier than Schuler in the post-war period to be like, hey, that, you know, I had nothing to do with that. Like, that guy was, you know, Delangle wasn't around to kind of give the other side of that story. Mm-hmm. Now, his ability to maintain his position and his wealth post-war was also aided by the fact that his later son-in-law, André Betancourt, was a member of the French resistance, as was Francois Mitterrand, who would later become the president of France. Both men testified on Schuler's behalf that he had provided money and assistance to the resistance, and so Schuler was exonerated. It helps to have money and well-connected pals on both sides, it would seem. And Chris, I think you'll be talking a little bit about Betancourt later on, but one curious thing from this time period that I found about him, I read a few conflicting accounts about this episode from 1944. One comes from a book called Ugly Beauty by Ruth Brandon. Another one comes from a book by Tom Sankton, the guy who wrote the Smithsonian article. That book's called The Betancourt Affair. And there's a few others in other articles and places online, but it goes something like this. Apparently, in 1944, Betancourt was dispatched to Switzerland, either on Mitterrand's or Schuller's command to form resistance contacts or to do some kind of Nazi dealing with Nestle.
Our old friends.
Unclear exactly what the trip was about. That could have been the cover for the former. But during this Swiss trip, it appears that Betancourt met with either Alan Dulles or his secretary, Max Schupp. And he came out of this meeting with 2.5 million francs to purportedly aid the resistance or set up some kind of post-war network favorable to the U.S., because there were other parts of the French resistance that were not, pro-U.S. in their outlook. The money was mysteriously never accounted for, and the conflicting stories about the account are due in part to Betancourt himself changing his story under scrutiny. Some curious stuff there, but in any case, back to Schuller. So, Schuller, had he actually been working with the resistance all that time? Was his later contrition about his, relationship to La Cagoule and fascism and Nazism genuine? All we know for sure is that he was able to successfully launder his reputation afterwards, in large part by distancing himself from fascists like Delangle and the organization La Cagoule. But yet, curiously, after the dust of the immediate post-war settled, a large number of former La Cagoule members were hired by Schuller. And if you're interested, there's apparently a book by Michael Bar Zohar called Bitter Scent, The Case of L'Oreal Nazis and the Arab Boycott, that sort of covers the La Cagoule members who got hired back in. But two people worthy of note, Schuller hired Delangle's son, Louis, who joined the Spanish branch of L'Oreal, as well as Delangle's personal secretary, Jacques Carrez, who had only barely escaped the Gestapo when Delangle was murdered. I think one of the stories was like he jumped out the window.
Oh my God.
That guy, Carrez, also later married Delangle's widow, so I guess he was a very loyal secretary.
Mr. Steal Your Widow.
Carrez was imprisoned for his fascist activities for 10 years after the war, but he got out after only 5, and then not soon after, he was appointed the CEO of the U.S. branch of L'Oreal. So I guess hair dye is also good at getting Nazi stains out of your past. So anyway, the rest of the story, Schuller continues to, run L'Oreal. He's very successful, as was mentioned in the L'Oreal biography, even gets some industry awards and stuff. He's heralded as, this great figure, this great entrepreneur. And then he dies in 1957. And at that point, the company of L'Oreal moves onward. It kind of leaves this uncomfortable ties to the Nazis in the past, or does it? And so the last thing I wanted to include here, it's a bit of a flash forward, and it's only sort of tangentially related, but I do think it's relevant, and I wanted to include it. And so I'll start by taking from this article from The Guardian in 2004 by Amelia Gentleman, titled "L'Oreal Profited from Victims of Nazis, Court Told." So, reading from the article, quote, "The French cosmetics company L'Oreal profited from a house which had been confiscated from its Jewish owners when they were sent to their death in concentration camps during the Second World War. It was claimed in the appeal court in Paris yesterday. Edith Rosenfelder, the sole survivor, now 76, has embarked on a long legal battle for compensation from the company, which had its German headquarters on the site of her childhood home for more than 30 years. The case is complicated by years of confusion, worsened by the frequent sale and resale of the property, but the family claims that L'Oreal is guilty of receiving stolen goods. Quote, L'Oreal know that the property was confiscated, and they know that the owners are still alive, Mrs. Rosenfelder's daughter, Monica Waitsfelder, said. All the other businesses which took Jewish property have since returned it, without any great debate. I don't understand why L'Oreal should be any different from the others. And now a follow-up to this case comes in the form of a News 24 article that came out a month later, and the title of that is Court Throws Out L'Oreal Case. And so reading from that piece, quote, L'Oreal had always argued that the Rosenfelder family had been compensated in 1951 by the Jewish Restitution Successor Organization, a body set up after the war to compensate victims of the Nazis, and that the claim was therefore invalid. Rosenfelder's daughter, Monica Waitsfelder, who was present when the appeal court made its decision, said she was stunned by the judgment. Quote, we are not important people, and L'Oreal are very important, she said, adding that she was now considering taking her case to the European Court for Human Rights. I really ask myself if France is a country of human rights, or if it is the country for the rights of people with money and power, said a tearful Waitsfelder. L'Oreal refused to comment on the ruling, end quote. And so we can recall here with the image of, this tearful descendant of victims of the Holocaust, dealing still in the 2000s with this case with L'Oreal. We can remember that line from the advertisement that we watched at the very beginning. We are a brand that gives power to women.
Fuck.
So, like every other company and family that we've covered that has ties to the Nazis, the pursuit of justice or for restitution remains ambivalent nearly 8 decades later. And since Schuller was successful in dodging his comeuppance at the time and sort of laundering and rehabilitating his reputation, he was able to maintain his wealth and the power of his company, which set the stage then for his inheritors. And so now I will turn it over to Chris, who will talk a little bit about some of the other figures involved in L'Oreal's later history.
So Eugene Schuller had one child, Lillian, who was born in 1922, and then when she died in 2017, she was the richest woman in the world at the time, the 14th richest person overall worldwide. She had a net worth of $44.3 billion at the time of her death. Anyway, so she joined so she was born in 1922. She joined the company at age 15 as an apprentice, mixing cosmetics and labeling bottles of shampoo. In 1950, she married French politician Andre Betancourt, who I believe, Shane, that you mentioned briefly. Andre Betancourt, very much like Eugene Schuller, was also a member of La Cagoule, the fascist group operating in occupied France, and he was awarded for his. Here's the interesting thing is because he was originally a member of La Cagoule. During the German occupation, he wrote more than 60 articles for a magazine, a newspaper called La Terre Francois, which was basically just a Nazi-funded propaganda outlet that he wrote articles for during the occupation.
As one does, just to get by.
It just happens.
Could happen to anybody.
Keeping your head down during a dangerous time.
Yeah, in their special Easter issue in 1941, here's a quote from him where he described Jews as, quote, hypocritical Pharisees whose, quote, race has been forever sullied by the blood of the righteous. They will be cursed. And
wow.
Fuck.
So,
okay.
Unlike, I guess, Eugene Schuller, Andre, I guess, when it became, I don't know, politically convenient or whatever, near the end of the war, he switched his allegiance to the French resistance. I didn't find the part that Shane mentioned, which was interesting about that. I guess the secret meeting or the money or whatever. But yeah, so at the end of the war, he switches his allegiance, which I guess is always how you know it's sincere, when you wait until the very end and you throw
when you're losing the fucking war.
Throw your support behind the side that's winning. So for doing that, he's awarded for his valor and his decency, and later serves as a cabinet minister under President Charles de Gaulle. So that's her husband. They had one daughter, Francois, who we've mentioned as well. She's born in 1953. She's now the chairperson of L'Oreal, and she's now the richest person in the world, the richest woman in the world, rather. And so in 1957, when Eugene Schuller dies, Lillian inherits the L'Oreal fortune and becomes the principal shareholder in the company. Here's an interesting little thing here. In 1974, out of fear that the company was going to be nationalized after the elections that year, she exchanges almost half of her stake in L'Oreal for a 3% stake in Nestle. Again, some other friends of the shows there.
There it is. That's synergy. That's synergy.
We work in tandem. Lockstep.
The interesting part, the part where it gets interesting with her is her relationship with this guy named Francois Marie Baynier, which I may be pronouncing wrong. I don't really care or know. But she meets him in 1987, and he's like a celebrity photographer or whatever. He's been commissioned to photograph her for this magazine. They become friends, and like over the years, she sort of like becomes his benefactor. Like, what's going on, Dwight? You sound like you got something you need to get off your chest, man.
Oh no! Oh my God! I'm sorry, Shane. You really got me with that.
I really love doing my little like German accent thing. And the fact that it brings you so much joy is just all the reward. I hope the listeners like it too, because I love to do it.
I really apologize. Please continue before we do any other.
Anyway, so she meets this guy, Francois Baynier, in 1987. He's a photographer. He's photographing her for this magazine. They become friends. She becomes sort of like his benefactor over the years, like giving him like gifts that like total. Like estimates total as much as like 1 billion euros worth of like gifts that she gave this guy. In 2003, she made him the benefactor of a life insurance policy worth 253 million euros. In 2006, she made him the benefactor of another life insurance policy worth 262 million euros. She gave him like 11 works of art in 2001, totaling about 20 million in value, including paintings by Picasso and Matisse. And also lots and lots and lots of cash over the years as well. So much so that in 2007, Lillian's daughter, Francois, who is by this point, they're sort of estranged by this point. So she lodges a criminal complaint against this guy, accusing him of exploiting her mother, Lillian, for financial gain. And here's a good quote from him about this. These are gifts which I refused for a long time. They are gifts from a woman whose mind is completely lucid. This is a sad case. This scandal is hurting a lot, a brilliant and free woman. But, they lodged this criminal complaint against him. This is in 2009 that the trial begins. And during the course of the trial, these tape recordings are made public. That were the tapes had been made by Betancourt's butler, and I guess he taped the conversations because he knew that she did have Alzheimer's, and was and he was concerned that she was being duped by this guy, being swindled out of all of this money. So he starts recording hours and hours and hours of these conversations. The tapes do reveal that yes, the Betancourt does have Alzheimer's. That she also made this guy Baynier her sole heir, not including the L'Oreal shares, which were already, which was like the biggest part of her fortune, but those had already been signed over to her daughter. Those were kind of out of the conversation. But as far as like everything else, like she made him her sole heir. What the tapes also revealed, though, was Lillian Betancourt and her financial advisor discussing ways to do, like various financial crimes, like hiding money in undeclared Swiss bank accounts to avoid paying taxes. There was also recorded conversations between Betancourt and a guy, and I have to be pronouncing this wrong because this doesn't sound anywhere near French enough, but Eric Wirth, who was the who was the Minister of Labor when the scandal broke, and this is like during the Sarkozy government, and the conversations had been recorded somewhat earlier, but like in the tapes, he was trying to get his wife a job managing Betancourt's money. And like at the time of the recording, he was the budget minister and was like in the middle of this like high profile campaign to like catch wealthy tax evaders.
Oh my God.
As he's like, as they're like being recorded, sort of making these sort of deals with, the richest person in France who is also, evading taxes.
What a tangled web.
I wanted to read a little bit because this gets a little bit more interesting, and it's funny how this like all of this shit comes out of this this case about this like other just like this guy like just like swindling this rich old woman, and then like this scandal sort of like widens and like brings in more and more parts of like the French government at the time that it was going on. So there's a little bit here from this Telegraph article.
I love it.
That I wanted to read, and this was from 2010. Because, like I said, Nicolas Sarkozy is president while all this is going on. And in July 2010, Lillian Bettencourt's former accountant gives an interview claiming that, in addition to everything else on the tapes, also thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars were given illegally to Sarkozy and to his presidential campaign. And I wanted to read a little bit from this this Telegraph article here that goes into a little bit of detail about that. It says, and this is the accountant here speaking. This is Claire Tibbet. I don't know. We're going to say Thibault because that sounds the most French, I suppose. And this is the accountant speaking here about Bettencourt. Said she is said to have provided Mr. Sarkozy with, quote, manila envelopes stuffed with cash following dinner parties at her mansion house. Claire Thibault, a 52-year-old accountant who helped manage Mrs. Bettencourt's fortune, said everyone in the household knew that Sarkozy also saw the Bettencourts for money. Mrs. Thibault's statement to police, which was passed on to French journalists, has now led to prosecutors in another Paris suburb launching an investigation into, quote, financial irregularities. Now a little bit about the payments itself. One secret cash payment alleged to have been made to Mr. Sarkozy's presidential election campaign was said to be worth 150,000 euros. Political donations in France are limited to 4,600 euros for individuals, and cash contributions cannot exceed 150 euros. And these were literally like envelopes stuffed with cash. Like it's like like fucking like bags with dollar signs on them, like that kind of like silly naked corruption. And all is, again, this is from the article here, all private campaign donations above that amount, above the amount of $150, have to be paid by check with the donor clearly identified. Mm-hmm. Okay, reading back from the Telegraph article here, this is the start of a major investigation into these alleged financial irregularities. Mr. Sarkozy has vehemently denied any wrongdoing in his dealings with Mrs. Bettencourt, but Mrs. Thibault said he was a regular visitor at her house between 1993 and 2002. Mrs. Thibault claimed she would regularly withdraw large sums of cash from a bank and then like pack them into envelope. Quote, Nicolas Sarkozy used to get his envelope too. Everyone in the house knew that Sarkozy went to see the Bettencourts to pick up money.
That's so insane.
Well, you'll be happy to know that Sarkozy has denied all the allegations and said that it was all libel.
Well, then it's fine.
Libel.
It's
Thank
fine.
God.
Yeah.
If that was true, that'd be terrible.
Mrs. Thibault has also pointed to Eric Wirth. Again, this is the former budget minister as being at the center of the alleged corruption. Mr. Wirth, whose wife was a financial advisor to Mrs. Bettencourt, I guess she did get that job until she resigned last month, has resisted opposition calls to stand down. He also denies all wrongdoing or any conflict of interest when he held parallel offices as party treasurer and until March budget minister. I did not receive a single euro illegally, said Mr. Wirth. This court case, by the way, this went on for like 6 years or something outrageous. I believe this like started in 2009, and this guy, you'll be happy to learn that at the end of all of this, Francois Baynier was convicted of abuse of weakness and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison and ordered to pay 158 million euros in damages to billionaire Lillian Bettencourt. Seven other defendants, including Bettencourt's financial advisor, lawyer, and notary, were also convicted. Notably not convicted was like Sarkozy or anybody anybody in the French government. Didn't have to face any sort of blowback for any of this other than to their reputations. And as you can guess, this sort of thing, this little blemish on the record is the only time L'Oreal or anyone close to them has been accused of tax evasion or anything like that. As Dwight, I believe you're going to get into a little bit here for us.
Yeah, you know it, man.
Can I just one funny thing about
Please.
Lillian that I just noticed on her Wikipedia that I think is worth reading to throw in here. Quote, she was reported to be one of the most high-profile victims of Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme, losing 22 million euros. She was the first investor in a fund managed by Access International Advisors, who was co-funded by René Thierry Magon de la Villehouche. De la Villehouche killed himself on December 22nd, 2008, after it became known that his funds had invested a substantial amount of capital with Madoff.
Oh,
yeah,
shit.
thank you for bringing it up. I forgot that part, yeah.
God damn.
Fucking outstanding. It's all the same cast of characters.
Yeah.
I was just watching part of Wizard of Lies last night, in fact, the Bernie Madoff biopic. Is it biopic or biopic?
Biopic.
It's definitely biopic.
Got it. Appreciate
The
it.
biographical picture.
We're doing it all tonight. I'm learning so many words. So let me try to bring their tax settlement stuff to a denouement. How do you say it?
I'm pretty sure it's denouement.
It's denouement.
Denouement.
Fucking hell.
Denouement.
I'm never going to use this.
Denouement.
I'm never
You've
gonna
used it so many times just today.
Yeah, well, it wasn't well. I didn't do well. So let's just start off again, with contemporary L'Oreal with their corporate affairs. Let's title this their corporate affairs section. So in tandem with some of the stuff that Chris was talking about, they have some interesting tax configurations, let's call them, with the French government. Of course, I think Chris, you were alluding to this. Between 2014 and 2018, there needed to be some, let's just say, adjustments to their tax burden and what they were paying the French government, where they had to say that we're actually having good conversations with the country's tax authorities, and we need to adjust it by about $350 million, which they did. But that's not the interesting part, because, when you are representing a large conglomerate, dare I say oligopoly, on particular sectors of goods and industries and all that things like consumer goods, well, you then have a incentive to do something which we know as collusion. And if you are
collaboration.
And if you are to, speak to other peers in your industry and say, hey, we've got this segment of consumer goods. What if we just kind of raise the price? I don't know, 5%, 10%. And that's what happened. I'm going to read here from a Guardian article from it's from a few years ago. This happened in 2014, entitled France fines 13 consumer goods firms 951 million euros for price fixing. And if I can put that into dollar amounts, convert 951 million euros to USD, that would be 1,076 million. But this was from a few years ago, so I'm going to put it into the BLS inflation calculator, and that was in 2014. So in today's dollars, it would be 1.3-ish billion dollars of a fine to all of these companies. And so I'm just going to read here a little bit. It says, some of the world's biggest consumer products companies, including Unilever, Reckitt Benckiser, Procter & Gamble, and Gillette, have been fined combined, in today's dollars, $1.3 billion by the French competition watchdog for price fixing in supermarkets. The regulator said 13 companies, who also include Colgate-Palmolive, Henkel, L'Oréal, Beiersdorf, and Johnson & Johnson's Laboratoires Vendôme, had colluded on price increases between 2003 and 2006. Quote, these two sanctions are among the most significant imposed to date by the competition authority. The regulator added that the price fixing had kept prices artificially high, affecting consumers and causing harm to the economy. So how did they do this? And this was interesting too. It says the price fixing affected a large number of popular brands such as Vanish Stain Remover, Palmolive Washing Up Liquid, Sun and Calgonnet dishwasher tablets, Sanex and Petit Marseille shower gel, shampoos including Head and Shoulders, Fructix and Elsiv, and Colgate and Signal toothpaste. Mouthwashes, deodorants, shaving creams, and razors, female hygiene products, body lotion, facial and sun creams, and insect sprays were also affected. So how did they do this? Check this out. The agency said commercial directors and other sales officials from the companies met, quote, regularly and in secret to coordinate price hikes at restaurants or via correspondence to private homes, as well as through telephone calls. The groups in which they met were called, quote, team or, quote, friends. One 2006 raid by investigators at a Parisian brasserie called Le Royal Villers. I'm really trying here. I'm really fucking trying.
Your effort is so commendable.
It's the effort that makes the difference here. I would deserve a participation trophy is what I'm asking for here.
Mm-hmm.
Caught colluding. So this raid by investigators caught colluding executives from Colgate Palmolive, S.C. Johnson, Henkel, Bolton Saltaire, and Sara Lee, quote, in the act as they were lunching, the regulator said. Now here's interesting. L'Oreal, the world's largest cosmetic company, which faces the biggest share of fines at 190 million euros, said that it was, quote, surprised by this decision and the amount of the fine, which are totally out of proportion. It denied anti-competitive activities and vowed to appeal. Unilever, the Anglo-Dutch maker of Dove soap and blah, 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 was handed the second biggest penalty of 172 million euros, which it will also appeal. So again, let me just say this one last part here. It said the regulator said the extent of the penalties reflected the size of the French cleaning products market at 4.7 billion euros per year and the personal hygiene market worth 7 billion euros. The French spent on average 190 euros each year on cosmetics and personal hygiene products at the time of the investigation. Both markets were dominated by 8 companies, with the biggest 3 accounting for 43% of the personal hygiene market, led by L'Oreal, which was alone at 28%. So again, if you're trying to talk about, I use the term oligopoly very purposefully because this is exactly what that is, right? An increasingly consolidated market gobbled up by an increasingly smaller group of firms. This is that's the whole fucking point of a monopoly, is that when you are a monopoly or, in a duopoly or an oligopoly or whatever, you can just set prices. You set the prices. It doesn't matter about consumer demand. You can just make whatever that demand is. And it's fucking sick. Especially, I might say, one could argue that it can become like a social justice issue because if there's a company that is predominantly marketing towards women, you just make women's lives more expensive by making their hygiene products just more expensive. So this is something that L'Oreal loves to do. And the reason I say that was because, and we're going to invoke some of our other friends here, there was another article that I read from 2012, a few years earlier, and I'm reading here from some fucked up website called cppluxury.com. Anyway, but it says here, I don't know, but it says here, a French court has fined perfume giants, including Chanel, Christian Dior, and L'Oreal, a total of 40 million euros, $53 million at the time of this article in 2012, for colluding to keep prices high. A Paris appeals court upheld the fine imposed in 2006 by the French competition watchdog, which said the companies involved had reached illicit agreements on price fixing, enforced by procedures to monitor prices in outlets, and backed up by commercial threats for non-compliance. Can you fucking believe? So what I'm reading that as is they had people actually go out into the boutiques, check the prices, and then be like, hey man, you better keep colluding. you better keep price fixing because I checked that shop on the fucking Champs-Elysees and it was a little low. 13 leading perfume and luxury goods companies were fined. Jean Paul Gaultier, Issey Miyake, Chanel, Clarins Fragrance Group, Hermes, Christian Dior, Clinique, Estée Lauder, Guerlain, L'Oreal,
Oh,
LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy. Fuckers. Again, if you don't remember, that was the company of Bernard Arnault. So anyway, it says, in its original ruling, which concerned events from between 1997 and 2000, the price watchdog said the companies, quote, had arrangements with distributors to put an end for each product under the brand name, any competition between retail outlets for these products. These agreements saw price police ensuring distributors were sticking to the deal and, quote, pressure and threats of commercial reprisals for those distributors that refused to pay the prices imposed by the brand. This is just like a fucking haute couture mafia. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
I mean, it's a cartel. It's a cartel behavior. Yeah.
Yes.
So I have to say, I love that, like, sometimes you, like, just give up on the pronunciation, but other times you're like, Guerlain, haute couture. Like, it's really wonderful. It's wonderful.
It's when
on
there's
your terms.
When there's certain ones that I'm like, yeah, I can get my head around this, then I'll give it a go. Again, I've never studied French. I've never been to France. I went to Quebec once, but that's a little different.
Pretty close.
Yeah, close enough.
Yeah, the same thing.
Same thing.
So, again, it's just so funny here because as I'm reading into this and they're talking about, like, here is a 2012 article talking about a 2006 fine, talking about price fixing that happened in the late 90s. It just shows you, the lag time for enforcing this. And again, it's one thing for us to step back and say, hey, well, this is cosmetic, so these are luxury goods, so it's not that important, but it speaks to the larger economy as a whole. Like, if firms, like we were talking about with Bettencourt, which had a stake in Nestle, there's a lot of integration of capital here. So if they're able to figure it out in this, why can't they do it with household goods? Why can't they do it with housing? Why can't they do it with other parts of the economy that are, essential or whatever? But it's also a lag time. And the other thing it tells me is they didn't learn from this.
Yeah.
Because only a few short years later, they did it again and got the largest proportion of a fine. So to them, I mean, think about this. It's like they make their internal calculations. Like, they know at some point that the music's going to stop and they're going to got by the freaking, French competition watchdog or whatever, right? The government agency that looks for competition. But they're like, well, maybe we'll get away for a while and it'll be worth the fine, right? They make these calculations internally, quietly, all the time. It's just when you have, oligopolistic competition like this, it becomes anti-competitive. And that's the whole fucking fraud of, like, the free market system. It's all bullshit. Anyway, they love doing crimes. And with that, speaking of which, I will turn it over to you, Carrie.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is labor issues at L'Oreal. And there are issues at L'Oreal's various corporate offices, as you can imagine, especially when it comes to racial discrimination and sexual harassment. I actually came across this Instagram account called Estee Laundry, which kind of airs out the beauty industry's dirty laundry, as you might imagine.
Nice.
And they do this about, like, all companies. So it's actually a really, really great account. But they have a highlighted section of their Instagram stories just showing what people have sent into them specifically about L'Oreal. And there are lots of articles as well documenting the different cases of employees that they've nearly driven to suicide with hostile work environments. Jesus. And also, in the last couple of years, they've been embroiled in a couple of scandals around racism, believe it or not. In 2017, they even fired one model for tweeting something against the Unite the Right rally. And then after they fired her, they issued a statement saying that they, quote, support diversity and tolerance towards all people, irrespective of their race, background, gender, and religion, which is like a fancy way of saying all lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
They were probably inspired by the images of La Cagoule that they saw at that rally.
Is it Raza Ghul? I think I've been hearing
it
that.
It does sound like
like
a comic book villain. Like
it really does.
Yeah.
And again, there are a lot of stories in this vein that you can find online, very clearly documenting how they've intentionally excluded people of color from working in their sales divisions or punished employees for speaking out against racism within the company or even outside of the company. And the response from L'Oreal is always, we have no idea what we're doing that could be considered racist. That's crazy. We care about everyone.
That's the problem,
maybe,
bro.
Yeah, maybe you're racist for thinking that about us. And, and all of that is obviously heinous, but I ended up coming across something else that I wanted to spend a little more time focusing on, which is looking at L'Oreal's labor issues through the lens of their use of palm oil. And if you don't know what palm oil is, it's a vegetable oil that's used in a lot of food and beauty products. And while the beauty industry isn't the primary consumer of palm oil, it is found in over 70% of cosmetic products. So if you walk into a Sephora or an Ulta, you're basically surrounded by palm oil. Same thing in any grocery store. It's found in like half of packaged snack foods. And this is in part because the palms that palm oil comes from are very efficient crops with a very, very high yield, much more efficient than other oil-producing crops. They can grow a lot of it in a short time on a relatively small amount of land. But if you're looking for a product in a store or a product you already have at home and wondering if it contains palm oil, you might think at first glance that it doesn't. Even if it does, because palm oil is often disguised in ingredient lists as one of like 200 other ingredient names, so it is hard to tell. And that's pretty convenient for companies that don't want anyone to look too closely at whether their products contain palm oil and where and how that palm oil was produced. Because the problem is that palm oil production has historically relied on severe deforestation and habitat destruction of endangered species like the orangutan, the pygmy elephant, and the Sumatran rhino. Oil palm plantations are the biggest drivers of deforestation in Malaysia and Indonesia, which is where between 85 and 90% of the world's palm oil comes from. In addition to that, its production involves severe human rights abuses, which is what I'm going to get into momentarily. But basically, this is a $65 billion industry that's built on extreme human and animal suffering. And so companies like L'Oreal, who rely on palm oil as a cheap, efficient ingredient in most of their products, have an interest in maintaining the illusion that they're sourcing their palm oil ethically. According to L'Oreal's website, they purchase around 300 tons of palm oil every year, but consume, via other ingredients purchased from suppliers, around 75,000 tons of palm oil. They have this list of ways that they're making sure the oil is ethically sourced, and they even created a sustainable palm index, a standard for evaluating suppliers and the supply chain to ensure sustainable and ethical palm oil production. Which again, and I feel like I go back to this a lot, but it really reminds me of the Kimberley process we talked about when we did De Beers, in that it doesn't actually lead to meaningful change in the exploitative processes around certain resource consumption, but it does kind of give companies something to point to and be like, look, we're trying really hard. You can't be mad at us. And that's basically what L'Oreal has been doing with years for palm oil, especially picking up around the time that this started to pop up more in the news in the 2000s, kind of trying to position themselves as an industry leader in the fight against unethical palm oil extraction while they, profit from it. And if you take it from them, they're doing great. Here's just a brief quote from their site. Since 2010, 100% of the palm oil it purchases meets the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil standards via the segregated model, which is one of the most demanding, end quote. And they go on to say that they actually go one step further than those RSPO standards because they care so much about ensuring the transparency of their supply chain, which they would have you think is ultimately out of their control in spite of their best efforts. On their site, they conveniently state that they're able to trace 98% of the palm oil they use back to specific refineries, 92% of it back to mills, but only 27% back to plantations. So the majority of their palm oil, they say, can't be traced back to the actual original source. You might wonder what this translates into for the workers who produce palm oil. Like we often see with supply chain issues, and like that little sentence about the percentage that they can trace back illustrates, there are several levels of obscurity here on the journey to trace this back to slavery, which is where we end up when we actually look at where the oil comes from when it's harvested from the plants. And there was an Associated Press investigation just last year where they interviewed over 100 current and former palm oil workers from 24 palm oil companies who came from 8 countries and labored on plantations across Malaysia and Indonesia. And I'll just briefly read from an article about the investigation. Quote, "The AP found widespread labor abuses on plantations big and small, including some that meet certification standards set by the Global Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil," the thing that I just referenced, an association that promotes ethical production, including labor practices, and whose members include growers, buyers, traders, and environmental watchdogs. Some of the same companies that display the RSPO's green palm logo, signifying its seal of approval, have been accused of continuing to grab land from indigenous people and destroying virgin rainforests that are home to orangutans and other critically endangered species, end quote. And the situations described in this investigation are like really beyond horrific. Some of them describe being held for years and forced to work to pay off insurmountable debts, at times with the help of local government and police forces to keep them in check. The conditions for women are especially bad. Again, going back to this like narrative that L'Oreal builds about empowering women, what this investigation found was that women have it especially bad. Many times they work for free in order to help their husbands meet just totally impossible quotas. Others work for pennies a day, and many are sexually assaulted by bosses who force them to exchange sex for keeping their jobs.
Jesus Christ.
And, you know, several of the people interviewed said if they report these assaults, nothing happens, and they just keep being forced to work with their rapists because the local police doesn't do anything. Ugh. And, you know, even apart from that, it's backbreaking, difficult work. One worker from Felda said, "We work until we are dying." And it says here that worker's eyes filled with tears after learning that Felda was one of the world's largest palm oil producers. And there's another story about a Felda worker who is not named, a pregnant woman who ran away from the plantation she was being held and forced to work. She gave birth in the jungle and foraged for food to survive and was eventually rescued.
Fuck.
Yet another Felda worker, and there's a reason I picked out these Felda workers, which I'll get to in a second, but yet another Felda worker named Joom describes being held captive by his boss, who confiscated and then lost his passport. And this is a common tactic that people use in like slavery. Yeah. They like take away your documents, they hold them, and they tell you can't leave. So he was forced to sleep in the jungle. And here's a quote from him. He said, "I am not a free man anymore. I desperately want to see my mom and dad. I want to go home." Incidentally, L'Oreal posted a list of mills and suppliers that they're linked to in 2019 on their own website. And Felda appears almost 50 times. Of course, L'Oreal, like the other companies who were found to be connected to these abuses, stated that they do not tolerate human rights abuses.
They just profit off of them.
Right.
Exactly.
We hate that this is happening, but we can't control it. Even though, like, you know, based on their own information, they know where their stuff is coming from, and they must know what's happening there because, I mean, here it is in writing. Looking at another worker account and reading from the AP investigation, this is a woman who has endured years of sexual harassment and threats from her boss. She dropped out of school as a teenager to work at a Sime Darby plantation, which is one of the world's biggest palm oil companies. Quote, "Now 27, Indra dreams of leaving, but it's hard to build another life with no education and no other skills. Women in her family have worked on the same Malaysian plantation since her great-grandmother left India as a baby in the early 1900s. Like many laborers in both countries, they can't afford to give up the company's basic subsidized housing, which often consists of rows of dilapidated shacks without running water. That ensures the generational cycle endures, maintaining a cheap built-in workforce. I feel it's already normal," Indra said. "From birth until now, I am still on the plantation."
Fuck.
Again, looking at L'Oreal's own list from 2019 of about 970 suppliers, just like Felda, Sime Darby appears almost 50 times. In addition to that, the workers are constantly exposed to toxic chemicals, which have severe health impacts. Some of them spray as much as 80 gallons of pesticide per day with no protection provided by the companies they work for. The chemicals spray back in their faces, their clothes, their bodies. One worker named Ola said, "Our lives are so hard. After spraying, my nose bleeds occasionally. I think it's connected to the pesticide." Another worker named Marido, whose 5 children also work to help their father meet his daily target, told journalists, "If the liquid shakes and spills out, it's also running into my private area. Almost all the women are suffering the same itching and burning."
Oh my God.
Yeah. And there were pictures in the AP investigation showing some of like the physical impacts of this on them. Some of them do go blind from it because it's spraying right into their eyes. One of the pesticides they use is outlawed in the EU, but it's obviously not outlawed where this is happening. Other workers have collapsed uteruses from the heavy loads that they're expected to carry.
Oh my God.
Yeah. One worker named Ida described losing 2 babies in the 3rd trimester due to the backbreaking loads of fertilizer she was expected to spread over acres and acres of land.
Oh my God.
And obviously none of them get any medical care from their employers or time off. They keep working out of fear of losing their housing and the little income they make. Ida told a journalist, "I kept working. I never stopped after the baby died." And that's, I mean, I don't even know what to say about that. There's so many stories like this in the article. I really just picked out like a handful to just illustrate how horrific the conditions are for these people. And according to the article, in response to all this, tying back to what we started on, L'Oreal said it, quote, has put particular emphasis on supporting and empowering women who are the first victims of many of the social and environmental challenges our world faces.
Fuck you.
Those challenges are from companies like L'Oreal. Like they're the ones creating this problem, right? And then they're acting like they can't do anything about it. And it's so horrible and it makes them so sad. But yeah.
That's such a fucking insidious move, you know what I mean? To put that forward. Yeah.
One of the things mentioned in I think it was the original AP investigation article that I read was L'Oreal's, it wasn't just L'Oreal, but it was other companies as well, because I think Unilever and Dove were also implicated in the same investigation. And it's like all these companies have these slogans that are like, because you're worth it, or like, whatever stupid Dove slogan is that they like tell women, like, you don't have to like care what other people think, you're beautiful no matter what. They have this like message of empowering women, and it's just like so insidious because they're like hurting countless women. Yeah.
Again, that's just like the disgusting hypocrisy of the message, and also like, I don't know. It's hard. I feel like a broken record sometimes because it's just like it's the model over and over and over.
Right.
They're converting these people's lives into dust. They're killing them, through labor and, horrific conditions and all that shit. And it translates to shareholder value for like literally like one tax evading, like in Alzheimer's woman, that's like doesn't even, it's so fucking sick.
Yeah.
I can't even like really get my head around it. Like, oh, God.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also a really clear demonstration that, like, in this age of sort of heightened focus on social justice issues in the popular mind, right? Like, a lot of companies have pivoted to making their brand this sort of like whitewashed, sensitive language laden kind of branding material, right? Or stuff that attempts to highlight these injustices that they're like culpable in fucking creating, right? And to me it's a clear demonstration of how like hollow it is when a company like that says something like, oh, we're here to empower women, right? It's not that message in itself would be bad, it's the fact that it's not actually being done, right? Like you're not empowering women, right? You're doing in fact the exact opposite of that.
And the reason they're saying it is to obscure the fact that they're literally killing women to make a profit. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
I don't have a fun wrap up.
No, I mean, look, I mean, I'm playing that commercial that we watched in the intro in my mind.
Yeah.
And just trying to like square that with, how this company actually conducts its operations. And again, like, with any of these kind of like large multinationals, they hide behind, relatively veiled supply chains to say like, well, we don't know exactly, we make a commitment to safety.
Right.
We make a commitment to investigate this and all this stuff, and we will provide a report.
Right.
Like, meanwhile, like, women are dying.
And at the same time, it's providing the reports that show that it knows it's working with these mills that literally operate based on slavery. Like, they're just releasing these reports. It's like, it's nothing. It's just they know what's going on, and they're providing this information about, like, this is where we're making our stuff. We're being very transparent. It's all above board to give the illusion that everything is good. And if you were to just, like, look at only their website, you would think that it's just all good, that nothing bad is happening, and that they're doing their best to keep it that way.
Yep. I'm not sure how much of an uplifting wrap-up we have for this, aside from the fact that I guess we can just summarize. Okay, Nazi KKK wannabes, weird people and trying to ingratiate themselves into an aging spinster's life so that they can do so that they
like
can
dirty
do
rotten scoundrels stuff. Like that's
political
crime. Yeah.
Exactly. Political crimes, tax evasion, price fixing, collusion, cartel behavior, and then slavery and just killing women for products.
You forgot girl boss.
That's right.
Yeah. That should be at the top of the list. Earlier I said that Francois Betancourt Myers was worth $88 billion. Apparently, actually now she's according to Bloomberg, as of today, worth $94.3 billion. So that's
awesome. And
just gone up.
Just FYI, her son Jean Victor Myers, one of her 2 children, is also now on the board of L'Oreal. So
we're doing well, guys.
Feel free to take a look at his Instagram, where you can see his little jet-setting lifestyle.
Stop. What's his name?
Here, I'll send you the link to his Instagram.
I really quickly, because I'm looking at this on Wikipedia, right? And it logs in December 2021. She's worth $94.3 billion. And in July of 2021, she was worth $86 billion. So that's a difference of $8 billion in the 6 months about. Which, if you just think about like what $1 billion is,
right.
like how impossibly huge that number is, and like what that would do to your life. Right? Or, I mean, let alone like a fucking $1 million, but like $1 billion, and to have just it go up by 8 in 6 months, just arbitrarily, like it's such an fucking indictment in my mind of the extreme accumulation of capital in the hands of so few people at the very top of this system. It's so fucking crazy, man. Like, it's nothing. It's like, if your bank account just fluctuates a little bit.
Yeah.
It's the same for us. If like it goes up $8 or down $8, and you look at it and you go, oh, okay.
Trust me, my bank account is fluctuating all the time.
I am constantly in flux.
I'm fluctuating right now, buddy. He is on Twitter. Nothing exciting.
Is he on Twitter? Nothing exciting.
Yeah, he doesn't tweet. He doesn't tweet. He doesn't tweet. His fucking Instagram, though. What's wrong with his goddamn face?
What's
wrong with his face?
I don't know.
He's just he must have had some work done or something.
Whom among us?
Yeah, well.
Well, like power, beauty sometimes needs to be taken.
That's very true. L'Oreal knows that. Who knows that better?
If only.
Oh, the other son is also a board member now. So just rest assured that all this like slavery is going toward continuing to enrich the descendants of the Nazis who started it.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds right for the end of an Eat the Rich show.
we could just cut that and just put that at the end of every episode.
All right, folks, let's close it up here, huh?
All right.
Till next time.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
There we go. Hell yeah.
You're worth it.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Stay cool.
See you at the club, Shula.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
We all know those moments when our confidence fades, when we hesitate, when we doubt. Yeah, we've all been there. And in those moments, we look for something that lifts us, makes us feel strong. And that's the power of beauty. When something makes you feel beautiful, it can make your doubts disappear, give you the courage to dare. And that's worth celebrating. Own it. Embrace it. Maybe it's a touch of lipstick, outfit that makes you feel your best. Whatever makes you feel confident is worth it. And for me, it's my hair. That's why I choose Preference by L'Oreal. When my hair is luminous, I feel luminous. When it's full of life, I feel full of life. Unstoppable. So when I take that last look in the mirror, I think, yes. I feel powerful, and I'm worth it.
Preference Hair Color by L'Oreal Paris.